I didn't say a word when the HOA president started shouting about unauthorized structures and community aesthetics. I just slid a folder across the polished table, county seal stamped in blue ink on the front, and waited. Their attorney was mid-sentence when he saw the first page. Historic Preservation Order No. 83, 1947, filed under the county registrar. His voice cracked halfway through the date. The president tried to laugh it off, but her face drained to the same color as the binder in front of her. That was the first time in months I'd seen them speechless. Before all this, I didn't move here for drama. I moved for silence. Real, soul-healing silence. After 30 years in engineering and 12 of those working with state infrastructure, I'd had enough of city noise and council meetings. My wife and I bought this place because it felt untouched by time. It sat at the edge of a narrow gravel lane, surrounded by oak and hickory, and behind the main house was an old outbuilding, stone foundation, timber frame, roofline low enough to touch. It wasn't big or pretty, but it was built by my grandfather's hands in 1947. He used it to store his carpentry tools, the same ones he'd brought home after the war. When I was a kid, I used to sit inside it and listen to rain hit the tin roof. When Apa said that building was the only thing I wanted to keep standing. I didn't join the HOA when I bought the property. The subdivision had formed years after my family's land was parceled and sold. The boundary cut right through what used to be my grandfather's field. So technically, my house was inside the HOA's map. But the land behind it, including that little building, had never been ceded into their jurisdiction. The old plat maps proved that, for months, it didn't matter. The HOA sent newsletters about community standards and uniform presentation, but I didn't taboter team, and they didn't bother me. I mowed the front grass, painted my porch, and minded my own fence lines. The first sign of trouble was a letter taped to my front door on a Tuesday morning. It was written in that bureaucratic tone only HOAs can perfect notice of violation. Unauthorized structure. They claimed the outbuilding violated height restrictions, setback rules, and exterior uniformity standards. I remember holding that paper and just laughing quietly. The building had been standing there for nearly 8 decades. It was older than the HOA itself. I figured it had to be a mistake. I called the number on the letter, got their office assistant, and explained that the outbuilding was a registered historical structure under the county's preservation program. She said she'd make a note of it and pass it along. I thought that was the end of it. A week later, I came home from running errands and found orange tape stretched across my driveway and heavy machinery sitting behind my house. The outbuilding, my grandfather's workshop, was gone, flattened. There was a moment standing there in the dust where I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not shock, just the kind of hollow silence that eats through your ribs. The demolition crew had already packed up. I called the HOA number again, and this time the president herself answered. Her tone was smug, dismissive. "It was an unapproved structure," she said. "We're bringing the neighborhood into compliance." I asked her if she'd gotten my call. She said she had, but that the board had voted unanimously to remove the eyesore. I remember the exact phrase she used. It was grandfathered in, but we're not in your grandfather's time anymore. That's when I stopped trying to reason. For the next few weeks, I worked quietly. I didn't rant online or storm into meetings. I spent evenings in the county archives, pulling every piece of documentation tied to that property. The preservation order had been renewed every 10 years. 1957, 1967, all the way to the 2017 renewal. The outbuilding was protected under County Historic Site Code 12.4b, which made it immune to modification or demolition without a formal county hearing and approval by the Heritage Commission. The HOA hadn't filed any such request. That alone was a violation, carrying a $50,000 civil penalty per structure. But that wasn't the end of it. The demolition had been contracted through a company that wasn't licensed for historical site work. I confirmed that through the Department of Licensing. They'd essentially torn down a protected structure without a single legal permit on land they didn't even have authority over. Every time I found a new document, primera madea copy, I built a binder. By the end, it was 2 inches thick and colored. The HOA kept sending me fines for failure to restore property condition. I paid none of them. I didn't respond. I waited until their annual board meeting in June. The invitation came as a courtesy, since technically I was still part of the subdivision. I showed up 15 minutes early in work boots and a clean shirt. The board sat behind a long table with plastic nameplates. There was coffee, cookies, and the usual fake smiles. When the president asked if I had anything to bring before the board, I simply said, "Yes, I'd like to discuss your recent demolition." She rolled her eyes and gestured toward the HOA lawyer, who began his rehearsed speech about compliance, community harmony, and property standards. That's when I slid the folder across the table. He opened it. The first page had the county seal. The second page listed the penalties for unauthorized modification of a protected site. The third page was a certified letter from the Heritage Commission, acknowledging that my grandfather's workshop was registered under preservation order since 1947, and that its destruction constituted a felony-level property offense. You could have heard a leaf fall outside that room. The lawyer stopped mid-sentence. The president's expression shifted from smug to stunned. I let them read for a while before adding, calmly, "I filed notice with the County Preservation Office this morning. You'll be hearing from their legal department shortly." Then I stood, thanked them for their time, and walked out. A month later, the county's heritage officer called to confirm that the HOA was under investigation. They'd received a formal complaint and verified my documents. It turned out the demolition crew's unlicensed work voided their insurance coverage. The HOA's legal defense fell apart almost immediately. Within 3 months, the president resigned. The board's treasurer and secretary followed soon after, citing stress and mismanagement. By fall, the subdivision was in shambles. Homeowners were furious, not at me, but at them. Their HOA fees had spiked to cover legal costs, and the county was preparing to issue fines for the unauthorized demolition. Some residents came by to apologize. Others avoided eye contact. It didn't matter much to me. I'd already started rebuilding. The county even sent a restoration grant under the Historic Rebuild program, enough to reconstruct my grandfather's workshop exactly as it had been. I hired a local craftsman to help. We used reclaimed timber, hand-cut nails, and old tin roofing that matched the original style. When it was finished, I hung my grandfather's hammer on the same nail where it had always rested. The HOA, stripped of half its board and knee-deep in debt, was dissolved the next spring. The county absorbed their administrative duties, and the neighborhood switched to voluntary association. No more letters, no more fines. Just quiet. Now, when I step outside at sunset, I can hear the same sound I used to as a kid. The wind passing through the trees and tapping against the tin roof of that little workshop. Sometimes a neighbor waves. Sometimes they look away. Either way, it's peaceful again. And whenever I pass that old wooden door, I think of the folder that started it all, and the silence that followed when the truth finally hit the table.